Well, you can't trust County.
Oh my
But I
God.
do have a case that is quite a blast for us. This is going to be an intense case for Creep Time. We are covering a story that I think for a lot of people it's difficult to believe that it actually happened because I don't know how many people are all too familiar with this story. What's interesting is I saw this after I started the research that not only had somebody recommended it on Reddit, and I have their name here, striking underscore milk 2318.
Baby. Striking milk in conservative
Striking
cups.
milk.
It's too much for
You've
me to
heard of Stracking
process.
oil. Have you heard of Stracking milk?
You have struck milk, baby.
You
so
have
bad.
struck milk. That's foul. But thank you for recommending this. I did start the research and I chose the case before I saw, and I went back through Reddit and I saw they had recommended it. And there's also a documentary on it. But I still think there are very few people who know the full story on this. Are you at all familiar with the story surrounding the I-70 Strangler?
I'm not. And in my head, I'm like, wait, did we go on I-70? Did we go on I-70? We did not.
We did not. We
We
did
did
not.
not.
No. Because I think that stretches through, I think, parts of Indiana and Ohio, at least with this
Okay.
case. That's what I know.
Okay.
That's what I've been told. But if you don't know very much about it and you do have those images picked up or pulled up, I'm going to put those up on Reddit, by the way. I will just graze us through a top line here. And I'm going to take us back to the 90s. We are in Indianapolis, Indiana, which we've both been to before in the 90s, in our 90s.
Yes, yes, yes. We were actually born there.
So the majority of this case, before we're going to get into it, it will actually take place through different club and bar stories, a lot of hookups and dates specifically surrounding gay men, because as we would learn, this is a case that almost exclusively targeted gay men.
Hmm.
There is one such instance where many of these men would come to the club, they would go home with someone, never come back, wind up dead, but one person got away and told their story. So before we dive into this, I am just going to give a preface and say that this will not only cover gay men who were targeted, there are also young boys who are involved. And I'll go into detail further about how that actually played into the story, how they were at these clubs, at these bars, how they were lured, etc. But if I'm going to start our top line here, I'm going to take us through a hookup story that quickly turned sour and then dangerous. 1994, Indiana. We're going to follow a man named Tony Harris. He's a young gay man who's living his life normally. He's very social. He's dating. He came into contact with another man. I could paint the picture of him. He has dark to maybe medium brown hair. He's on the younger side, and he went by the name Brian Smart, a name that even Tony thought was a cover name, which granted, it is the 90s, right? So there's a lot of down low gay men. There are men that maybe have high profile jobs who are still closeted, or there's something more sinister. There are gay men who have families that they're trying to keep undercover. So the whole faux name thing didn't initially throw Tony off. And Tony is actually not the real name for this person who came forward. That's an alias to protect his identity after the fact.
Hmm.
So we're going to start our night out at the 501 Tavern or the 501 Club. This is in downtown Indianapolis, and this all happened a little while before the full story of this came out. Brian had told Tony at the club that he was a landscaper. And he says that he's working on a luxury property in the suburbs, huge estate, and the family has not moved in yet. So he says to him, "Do you want to come back with me?" So he kind of sets this up by saying that he's got booze, they can make cocktails, there's an indoor swimming pool, they can go skinny dipping. It's setting up for like a hookup, I'm going to take you home situation. Tony agrees to go home with this Brian guy, Brian Smart. Even on the drive up, Tony's getting some vibes in the car that something's a little off with this guy, and he's a little nervous because there are no cell phones. He doesn't have a way to contact anybody. He just went home with a random, so he's watching the street signs and trying to like map out all of the different turns from downtown Indianapolis to see exactly how far they're going, which neighborhood and direction they're going into. But somewhere along the lines in the dark, from the drinking, he loses track of exactly where they're going because this is kind of deep into the suburban area. Not a great sign.
Mm-mm.
So they end up arriving at this house, It's not just like a regular home, like a nice home. It's an estate. It's huge, too. It's
Oh my
really
god.
nice, very private, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as to how this estate came into play, who it belonged to. So they pull up, and just as, he had said, it's completely dark. There's nobody there. So they get into the home, and immediately this Brian guy, Brian Smart, he leads Tony into this very dark hallway and then down to the basement level because he's saying there's an indoor pool down there. So that's where we're going to have drinks. That's where we're going to go skinny dipping. Follows him down, and sure enough, there is an indoor pool. I think I have some pictures of that on the first page. Do I?
You do. This is so dark and so 90s. This indoor pool setup.
It's even creepier than you can imagine, actually, because when Tony goes down there following Brian for this hookup, walks into the pool area, the pool is immediately surrounded by mannequins.
Stop.
Mannequins. So Tony kind of freezes for a second. He's like, what is going on? And
Yeah.
Brian notices that he's like taken aback. So Brian makes this really strange kind of off color joke. And he's like, I get very lonely down here. They keep me company. Not good. Not good.
That's not what I'm seeing in these pictures, right? Those are like little palm trees or something?
Those are little palm trees.
Okay.
There were the mannequins, I think, are actually closer, I would say, from the pictures I've seen, which I did not include. I should have, closer to like poolside statues, which to me
Okay.
reads as very 80s, 90s.
Yes, yes, yes.
So Brian makes this joke. He goes, they keep me company. And Tony's still under the guise that this is like a landscaper who's just sneaking him into a property. Tony's a little bit uneasy and he's trying to navigate the situation about like whether or not this is going to be weird. Is this going to go rogue? How do I get out of here? I don't even know where I am. And in the midst of that, Brian's like, how about I offer you a drink? I can get you a drink. Tony says no, which was really smart. Brian ends up going and getting a drink. So he says, and then comes back, and Brian is very relaxed, very chill, almost like it wasn't quite the drink. It was maybe a drug that he took or something. Tony's unsure.
Mm.
So what happens next is that the two do go into the pool. They start skinny dipping. It's totally dark down there, I think, except for the pool lights. And then once they get out of the pool, they start to hook up. Now, this is when things do go off the rails because Brian asks Tony if he could try something with him, something he's been experimenting with. Also a bad sign.
Oh god.
Brian says that he's really into autoerotic asphyxiation, choke play,
Mm.
let's say. And Tony's kind of nervous and he's a little confused. He's very green to this. He doesn't exactly know what it is or how it works. So Brian's like, okay, so the way that it'll work is you can choke me first, and we just kind of hook up while you're cutting off my air supply, but then release just before it gets too far. You can choke me first, then I'll choke you second. So Tony, again, green and just going with the flow, tries to do this. He's playing it very light and safe, almost like it's just like mocking rough play, truly treating it just like a surface level kink. Then Brian takes his turn to choke Tony poolside on the ground. He grabbed his neck, and from what Tony remembers, he starts to squeeze his fingers into his throat, and immediately Tony becomes aware that this is not a game.
Mhm.
This man's trying to choke me.
Mm.
And it's not really about breath play or rough play. It's not a kink. He is trying to hurt me. So Tony does something which I think we all sort of imagine we could do in the movies and like in these scenarios. He does the smart thing where he plays dead.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Tony does like a little bit of like a struggle. He is struggling because he's actually being choked. And then Tony relaxes his whole body, kind of flutters his eyelids and he closes them. And he just lays there limp. And that's when Brian releases his hands. And then Brian kind of leaned in from what Tony remembered to just double check and make sure. And he goes, Tony. And Tony shot his eyes open and immediately pulls back. And then Brian's like, oh, shoot. Okay, he's still like conscious and awake. There's a little bit of a back and forth where Tony's like, you were trying to hurt me. And Brian's like, no, 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 no. Like sometimes these kinks just go too far. Sometimes the play is too rough. Brian's trying to like play it off as like, no, 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 no. We were just playing. It's cool. There's no fuss. There's no fight. Tony says, I want to be dropped back off in downtown Indianapolis,
Mm.
which this Brian guy does. But the significance of this hookup in this moment is that it puts something in Tony's mind that reminded him of something else. Tony had a friend, which I will get into a bit later, who had gone missing. Another gay man under an eerily similar circumstance where people last saw him leaving a gay club or a bar and he had gone off with a mysterious man and then wound up dead. Tony cannot really explain what it is that made him feel this way, but he is dead sure the man that may have killed his friend was the man he just hooked up with.
Mm.
So Tony does this insane thing for the time, which was really brave and very bold. And he goes directly to the police and he leads with this. And he says, I just hooked up with a man who took me to this place. I'm not exactly sure where it is. I don't know what his actual name is. I think he used an alias, but I think he is responsible for the kidnapping and death of my friend. Before we go any further, what I will say is that this hunch, this gut feeling that Tony had, was very much correct, because the man that he encountered on that night that he escaped from would ultimately be linked to and responsible for upwards of more than 25 different murders of gay men.
Oh my God.
Let's just pause there. How are you feeling with all of that setup, all of that scenario? Because Tony really is the catalyst that brings a means to an end with all of
Also,
it.
not to make light out of this, the second you said he was responsible for 25 murders, that Post-it note I just put up went flying right down. So that was creepy.
You know, I had something before. I'm not going to get us too sidetracked, but
Yeah.
last night while doing this research, sometimes strange things happen to me in the middle of the research. I forgot exactly which moment it was, but my remote flew off my coffee table. And I was
hell?
like, I must have rested that in a strange way. I was like, maybe it just like flipped off a book or something. It truly like flipped off the table.
Yeah. I was
And
thinking that, but
I was like,
I stick up notes all the time, and it was like right after you finished saying 25 murders, it went right down.
what
So
did the note say?
anyways,
Just curious.
it said your bad audio is related to the USB Scarlet cord. Gentle reminder, honey.
No.
So, with that being said,
They said, make sure you're heard, babe.
it did. My first thought when I was looking at these is I was like, is this guy's actual home? Is this someone else's that he's broken into?
Mhm.
Like, who is this character? Also reminds me eerily of like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh my God. I literally wrote that in my notes. I was like, incredible that Jeffrey Dahmer is like so commonly known in pop culture. And of course, there are series and all kinds of things about this, but this is arguably to me like on the same level in terms of
Yeah.
targeting queer men and boys.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That part of it, and also having the one person that kind of made it out alive to be able to say, hey, I think I know who this is, or something terrible happened to me.
And to not be believed by
And
police initially. I didn't get to that part.
Right. Oh my
It's
God.
It's very, very similar. And not that it took place in the same exact location, but still a lot of this happened in like a very rural part of the country. It's Yeah, it's eerily similar in that way. I was just shocked because I think the problem is that this is conflated with two different things, and one is technically on paper unsolved, which would be the I-70 Strangler.
Mm.
Although most investigators and professionals who have looked at this do believe that this is all connected back to this one man who is eventually caught.
Okay.
But before we get into a whole case, we should do our little intro. Welcome back to CreepTime, the podcast with Celestine and Stu. You guys, we're back.
Y'all, we made it. We didn't go flying off a mountain.
That you've heard about.
Oh my God.
If you are brand new here,
creepers.
we come out with new episodes every single week, and we're so happy that you guys are here. So please stick around, follow, or subscribe to the show. You can also give us a positive review. If you're liking what you're hearing, you can leave us comments. We love to interact with those, specifically on Spotify and on YouTube. And I will also say, if you are brand new, consider telling somebody you know about CreepTime, the podcast. That is really helpful to have that word of mouth interaction, whether it's a coworker, a friend, a family member, or you could just write about us online. Really, really helpful for growing the show. And of course, we have lots of extras for you to engage with. We have CreepTime After Dark, which is our after show that is comedy based. We also have The Sinister, which is a solo show that I help run. And if you want even more content, you can unlock our premium episodes on Spotify or Apple. That gives you exclusive, highly requested episodes at a premium because, baby, they are unedited and uncut.
And you do want to hear us cuss, let me tell you.
And boy, do we.
So
Boy,
good.
do we. It's because we're so censored on CreepTime that we have like pent up like need to cuss
Yes.
that once we get to premium, we're like,
Yeah, because all of our opinions come flying out unfiltered.
Mhm. It feels like a safe space. So please consider becoming a premium and join today on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And we have one more thing to mention here. It is a message from our friends at Magic Mind.
Our
Ivy,
dear friends at Magic Mind. Oh my god, I miss those freaking gummies.
I know. I'm
You
not actually.
stole them from
Did I
me.
steal them?
I was just saying you stole my
I wasn't
goddamn
sure.
house.
I was like, you stole my house. We got to unpack the
Oh,
reunion a little bit later. We'll do that off camera.
I know. I was just saying I
But
haven't watched it yet, so
you haven't?
I haven't. I haven't had time. I haven't watched it yet.
Oh my God.
I know my spirit.
Baby, and you got the YouTube TV too. You pre-recorded it.
I know. I know.
But before we conflate our Bravo deal with the
I
Magic
know.
Mind deal, Magic Mind, they have rolled out a brand new product, and this is the last time that I think they're going to be running this promo with us, but it is magicmind.com/creeptime, or sorry, creepgm with the code creep25 because they are rolling out gummies. The GM is for gummies. So if you want something that's a little more on the go, you want all the same kick and all of the benefits of Magic Mind shots, you can now get them in gummy form, and they are so convenient. I said this last time, but they are so convenient to travel with,
So
specifically for us on
convenient.
the road.
Oh my god. Well, I was popping those things left, right, and center. Like truly, every time before a show, I would like either we'd be on the way to a show and I'd find them in my little bag, or we'd have them at the show, and I was like
Mhm.
housing them. They're so tasty creepers. And if you're, I feel like I'm somebody that kind of enjoys like a little snack bite like that even more than just like taking a shot if I don't have it refrigerated or whatever.
Mm,
And those gummies are so good. Like I can,
I
like
know.
I'm actually craving them. I don't have a
Same.
bag.
I say that about the shots too. I crave the shots. It's a
Yeah.
specific like matcha green apple type flavor between both of them that I've really grown to love. And you're
Yeah.
right. They are convenient. It's a really easy snack type food to
Yeah.
ingest that's
I
actually
don't
going to benefit you. They will help promote focus. They can help promote mental clarity, a calm sense in your body, a
mhm.
flow state, as they
A
like to
flow
say.
state, all without caffeine, baby. And that means little kids can
Yes.
have them. Which like if you're creeper moms and dads, like this would be a great little treat for a kid. They really do taste great. And if your kid is rambunctious, it would kind of put them in a nice little flow state.
It can help promote it for sure. It's interesting because I feel like that's the new feature that they haven't really talked about the most when it comes to the gummies versus the shots. Kids can have them, and I think they're a little more accessible for kids because kids are used to having gummy vitamins. I'm
Mhm.
used to having gummy
Yeah.
vitamins, so for me, they were great.
Yeah. No, I can't as a little kid, I know I would be like, "Can I have like 5 more?" Which I think they can only have 1 at a certain age,
I
but
think they're down to like 1 or 2. Adults can have up to 3, I believe, but nothing but benefits. We have absolutely
yes.
loved working with Magic Mind, and we're so grateful that for them rolling out this new product for gummies that they trusted us to give all of the creepers 25% off their first order, whether it's a single time order or you want to get a subscription. You can go to magicmind.com/creepgm. Your code is creep25. Please take advantage of getting 25% off. We want to hear how you love the gummies.
Yes, seriously. I'm about to use that code today myself.
I was gonna say, I was like, baby, they will send us the
I know. I'm
packages.
like, they will send it to me, but I'm like, I need my gummies.
My gummies. Well, thank you guys again for engaging with that. And for everybody who's already gotten their orders for Magic Mind, we love seeing that.
Yes.
So continue to share that, continue to post about it. We love seeing that you're coming on the Magic Mind train with both of us.
Yeah, my God, that's so fun.
But with that said, we can now shift into our story. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Okay. This is a monster of a case because it spans multiple years, technically multiple decades, I would say. So there's quite a long history, and the challenge that I faced in doing the research was kind of figuring out how to compact all of it into one episode and do justice to telling the story to its completion. But I think before we start, I'm actually going to approach this in a different way from how I've approached previous Creep Time episodes. I think I'm gonna have to give backstory on our culprit, which I
Okay.
usually leave to the very end where like I reveal. I think we should start with him because it does come out that he is caught, although he is never definitively pinned as the culprit.
Okay.
Most people believe he is. So this man, Brian Smart from the hookup story, is actually a man named Herb Baumeister. Does
Hmm.
that name sound familiar at all?
It does not, but what a name.
Herb.
I can understand why he had an alias.
Yeah, Brian Smart is an interesting one. I mean, I think Brian is probably a good gay guy name.
Uh-huh.
Feels like a good gay guy name, but Herb just doesn't do it.
Herb
Doesn't hit the
Baumeister.
ear. Herb
That's some well, I was
Baumeister.
saying you're not gonna forget that name. If something went down and he had told you his name, I'm not forgetting that one.
No, well, he was actually, I wouldn't say he was like wildly well known in the area, but he was somebody in
Hmm.
Indianapolis. He was quite wealthy because that estate that we were talking about was his.
Oh, it was?
It
Okay.
was.
Wow.
So, Herb, to give you a bit of backstory on him, he was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, on April 7th, 1947, the oldest of four children to an anesthesiologist, Dr. Herbert Eugene Baumeister Sr. What's interesting about his childhood, from what I was reading, is that there seemed to be nothing really wrong with his upbringing, which I am always incredibly suspicious of whenever we look at these cases, specifically with serial killers. And they're like, there was nothing odd or out of the ordinary. And I'm like,
Doubt it.
I don't know that I fully believe that. Nothing traumatic was listed in the research. However, from a young age, I would say from what I read, from his adolescence and up, around like 12, 13, he started to exhibit some abnormal behavior for his age. There were concerns at his school and concerns within his home that his family were aware of. Herb was reaching his teen years, and he was caught several times playing with dead animals. Let's start there. Unsure if he was
Classic.
responsible for killing those animals or if he was just seen playing with dead animals, mutilating dead animals, whatever it may be. But he also had this side plot going on with this early fascination with urine, very sexually connected to urine. I think there's an official name for it, urophilia, I think. Urophilia. Yeah, that's what I
Mm.
wrote. This kind of permeated his school life because he became really intensely obsessed with his teacher's urine and teachers encountering his urine. And he would fantasize about what it would be like to taste other people's urine. He got caught multiple times at school peeing on his teachers' desks, peeing on their stuff, on their clothes when they were out of the room. So all of this ends up getting back to, I believe, his father. And don't forget, this is the 50s and 60s when he's growing up. So this is extremely concerning behavior for a
Mhm.
family. He ends up getting submitted to psych evals from a very young age because, again, this started around like 13 and was persistent through his high school years. He ends up getting diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia as well as antisocial personality disorder. Now, despite these psychiatric disorders, his father, being a doctor himself, reportedly did nothing to aid his son's psychiatric ailments. He did not receive any therapy that I read about, he did not receive any medication. There was no course of treatment, so it's unclear how the family dealt with this behind closed doors. But we're going to assume something happened because I don't think the feelings ever went away for him. I think he just got very, very good at hiding them, right?
Mhm.
So that said, Herb goes on to graduate. He does attend college for a little bit. I don't think he graduated college, though. I think he was there for like a semester, dropped out, went back, dropped out again, but he just kind of float around through several different jobs. I did find reports that in his early years in the workforce, he also had unusual sexual behaviors at work, which I think he got called out for. I think he may have gotten fired for, but he's figuring out through this period of his life how he's actually going to climb and navigate the social and professional arenas that he's been thrown into so that he can make a living, start a family. What's interesting is that by 1971, he does start that family. He actually met and married a young girl named Julie Sater, and the two had married and would have three children together in a short number of years. During this time, through the 70s and 80s, just because things looked very normal and cookie cutter on the outside does not mean that was true behind those closed doors. Not even 6 months into the marriage, I read that Herb's father and family had him recommitted to a psychiatric ward due to extreme and abnormal behaviors. What those were, bit of a mystery, kind of undocumented, but something had gone down 6 months into the marriage. And I'm going to get ahead of myself here and just throw out, oh, this is purely rumor. This is a hunch, but I don't feel too bad about it because it's Herb.
Mhm.
What we would learn was that him and his wife had, I guess I don't even know if I could call them intimacy issues, but they were not intimate really at all. And
Mm.
I'm wondering if 6 months into the marriage, arguments had kind of reached a peak around that. And the accusations that he may not be interested in her or women kind of spiraled into him lashing out or having a bit of a break or an episode.
Mhm.
Because what we would learn later on, after 20 plus, I think 25 years of marriage, they had had sex a total of 6 times.
Oh my god. How did that come out?
She told
S
police.
Oh my god.
She
Wow.
and I, the thing is, it's unclear, what her situation was and if he was the first and only man that she was ever intimate with. I can't imagine that she thought that was normal, but maybe just normal for him, that she had married a bit of an odd bird, and this
Yeah.
would just have to be her new normal. But it's shocking to me that 3 out of those 6 times did produce pregnancy, so something
Hello.
happened.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting to think about, like, if any of his kinks came into play and maybe
Mhm.
that like, they came out later on, like, after they had dated and maybe she wasn't as into it, but at that point, it was so far into the relationship.
That's what I was thinking with the psychiatric, being recommitted to the psychiatric ward, was that 6 months into the relationship, if she's feeling abnormal about their sex life and trying to
Mhm.
explore, like, "Do you have something that you wanna try?" Like, this is pure rumor, to be
Yeah.
honest, I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
building this story, but I kept trying to think what would have been triggering in the first 6 months of the marriage that would have him recommitted, but that's all
Sure.
that we know that happened. So, like I said, decades later, after 25 years of marriage, this comes out they only had sex 6 times, so it seemed pretty known that he was maybe asexual to her, or she had at least had a hunch that he was not entirely interested in her or women. It was just kind of a silent pain that she lived with. She knew her husband was a troubled man. Something felt wrong, and even once they hit the 80s, he takes a bit of a different approach to how their relationship works and how their relationship specifically with children works. He required a lot of alone time, time away from her, which I don't know if she fully suspected was him doing something sneaky behind her back, or like I don't think she necessarily suspected that he was cheating on her with another woman. I think maybe she just thought that he was not a very sexual person
Mm.
and that he needed isolated time away from people in general. The excuse that he used was that he needed it for business planning because, as we would learn in the 80s, his career actually takes a dramatic turn, an entrepreneurial turn, where he acquires the Save a Lot thrift store chain in Indianapolis and finds some major financial success.
Wow.
Even so, between the security, the new money, the wife, the kids, there was something going on behind the scenes that dates back all the way to the early 80s. But before I go any further, what are your thoughts just on this scenario, the marriage, acquiring the business, this new money, all of it?
It feels like there's a lot of, like, Band-Aids happening for something that's been underlying for a very, very long time. It feels like even from the time he was a little kid, it was just like, let's pretend like the something that's happening psychologically with him isn't really existing, and
Just so interesting.
I think he must have trained himself almost to, like, kind of believe that too. Like, okay, well, if I just kind of Band-Aid my life with, like, the correct course of action, like get married, become financially successful, all these things will just eventually I'll have a great life and it'll go away, and this thing that I'm thinking about will stop, and
Mhm.
I think we know that that is oftentimes that's gonna rear its ugly head later on in life when all those things happen, and then it's like,
Yeah.
"Where do I go from here?" So that's my first kind of thought is I'm just like, "Oh god, I feel like things were not handled from a young age, and this has just been bubbling."
That was the strangest part about it. I was like, even with the father coming from a background in medicine, that his dad didn't really, from what I read, he didn't really have a plan for like a course of treatment for his son, or did not. It seemed like he didn't get him into the proper care or the proper hands to really evaluate and treat him. It
Mhm.
was kind of just a diagnosis and then private conversations that went on in their home.
Yeah.
And then he
Yeah.
learned to hide these things or stuff them down. And suddenly, yeah, it does rear its ugly head much later in life in a very grim and sinister way.
God. Yeah, I'm just nervous as to how I mean, I know the gravity of it from you saying 25 murders, but my god, how does it all start and then snowball?
It's amazing. I mean, the nature of the serial killer and acquiring or accomplishing 25 different kills, and some believe it's more actually, but how long he was able to go on doing this without being checked, without any suspicion, because again, from the outside, it is that cookie cutter image.
Mhm.
He's a very wealthy man who owns an estate, has a chain of these like thrift stores, he has a wife and kids. Nobody suspects that he's out there picking up and killing gay men, but that's
Mhm.
exactly what was happening. So if we know, starting from well before 1994, when all of this went down with Tony going to the police after that strange hookup, there was something much darker here, but where does it actually begin? June 1980. Herb is 33 years old at this time. So he doesn't even have the money and the thrift store just yet. Like he doesn't really have much of anything. He's into his marriage and he does have kids at this point. The plot begins in this year, and it's unclear as to why it was this year that he started, but he did. We have Michael Sean Petrie, a 15-year-old sex worker, gay sex worker, who is found lurking in the Indianapolis gay bars, which is wild that 15-year-olds were able to sneak into bars. But he is working on the night of June 7th, where he's sort of cruising and looking around, but men are looking at this child. There is a man who looks like he's on the younger side, early 30s, sort of discreet, maybe a typical customer for what this kid might have encountered. But this is the story. What we know is that witnesses saw Michael, this 15-year-old, leaving with a nondescript man. Some even claim they saw Michael in a car with this man, and then he went missing completely. That was on the 7th. By June 16th, in a rural part of Hamilton County, Indiana, a nude body of a young boy is located. Michael is fully naked, deserted, and had been strangled violently to death by an unnamed culprit, to pin this to. That, in addition to immediate resistance from county police in that area, which is a massive theme in this place of county not wanting to get involved because it surrounds gay men.
Mm.
And either the missing person reports aren't taken seriously, and they're like, these are runaway kids who are trying to escape their conservative families and go to more liberal parts of the country, or bodies are literally being found. And police are like, well, it is what it is, kind of thing. That's sort of exactly what happened here when it came to this 15-year-old. 15-year-old Michael would mark the first kill, the first known kill of Herb. By the next month, this is July 22nd, same area, that rural location in Hamilton County, a second body would turn up. This was a partially topless, strangled, although it's not officially confirmed they were strangled, but it was reported as such, body of a 22-year-old Maurice Allen Taylor. Now, Maurice was known sort of locally as a young man who I think was actually living closer to Hamilton County, and he was known to be homeless. He was often seen in gay bars or near gay clubs offering sex favors to various men as a way to make extra cash. This is more than likely the way that he encountered Herb. He was immediately establishing a pattern, Herb was, that this kid would come in, he would often talk to men, he would often go off with men. So I think that's a part of the psychological playing field that Herb was working with here. He's like, I'm targeting male sex workers because they are used to going off with men to discreet locations in the dark and they don't think twice about it. That set the perfect stage for him to get him vulnerable, far away, and for nobody to really watch or see them go away in this area.
Mhm.
And then he strangles them, deserts them. But the other thing, of course, that kept Herb out of suspicion were these large gaps of time between his kills. I think those first two kills that happened back to back in 1980 were very quick, like one after the other. He goes quiet again for like 2 years. He doesn't do anything, which we've seen before. I'm trying to think of
Mhm.
another case that we've seen that's similar to that, where somebody kills and they take a long period of downtime, which gets the heat off them. Police kind of forget about it, falls to the back of an evidence locker, and then they strike again.
Yeah, it's happened a lot. I mean, Zodiac is always the first one that comes to my mind.
Mhm.
Also, I feel like another pattern here that's reminding me of I don't know if it's Zodiac or maybe one of the other ones that starts kind of similar, but starting really young because you know those are going
Mhm.
to be like the most vulnerable people, and then gradually like aging up or like getting more. I have a feeling he's going to go more and more like rogue, but
Like go younger or go older?
like maybe not even go older, but just like he's starting with someone super super vulnerable, like a
Yeah.
15-year-old, and then he's going to go sex worker, which is like another vulnerable person, but, like, I'm just curious if he's gonna try to do things other than just strangle or, like, go more intense.
I think that's kind of common in most of these serial killer cases that we've seen, actually. They always end up pushing limits. I guess I am thinking of maybe Ted Bundy comes to mind, but yeah,
Mm,
they start
mhm.
off, I don't wanna say safe, but kind of, like, they start safe with, like, testing the waters, and then they keep trying to push this element of, like, "Could I get caught?" I think
Oh,
that's an
yeah.
element of it for them. They're like, and it's not even necessarily, it's not as blatant as, like, Zodiac, where they're taunting the media, taunting the police. They try to push, like, even with, like, how careful or uncareful they are with the kill.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
it
we do
turns
start to
them
see
on.
that. Yeah, yeah, which is so fascinating. I don't really know what
Mhm.
that is psychologically for them that does that. But like I said, there would be another 2 years, I believe. Yeah, 2 years until the next kill. This would be Delvoid Lee Baker, who was a 14-year-old, extremely young. He would turn up dead. Hamilton County, once again, by October 3rd, 1982. Delvoid was last heard from his parents, from what I read. I think he was heading out earlier the night before his disappearance, and he had called them, I think from a payphone, around like 10 or 10:30 and said that he was gonna go catch a late night movie, and he's on bike, right? What he was actually doing and had been doing for months was sneaking around gay bars and sneaking into gay bars, even though he was underage. He was sneaking in, he was trying to explore, trying to cruise. What's sinister about this is that he had made such a habit and a pattern of it that Herb had noticed, and Herb saw his next prey.
Mm.
So, what witnesses claimed to see was that, again, a nondescript, kind of like mid-30s man lured this kid away. Nobody seemed to bat an eye, if they even saw it, but the few who did not. And nobody had seen him after. The only thing they remembered was that the man who lured him away was kind of a mid-30s white guy with a bushy mustache, is what was listed in the report. But I think after the murder in 1982, again, there is another semi nude male body discovered in Hamilton County. And this was when I think rumblings of a serial killer first made waves in the press. A task force is assembled with 8 officers. It's created in Indianapolis with the Indianapolis police by 82, and they are set up to investigate these crimes. They were already starting to establish this connection that there were a lot of men and boys who were connected to gay nightlife shortly before the murder, so they knew this had something to do with that. But then Michael Andrew, otherwise known as Mick Riley, age 22, disappeared on May 28th, 1983, after visiting the Vogue Theater, which I think is also a gay nightclub or was a gay nightclub in Indianapolis. He was last seen with an unidentified man with whom he later left. And eventually, I think by June 1983, Mick Riley's strangled and abandoned body is located in Hancock County. And he would also be connected to this new wave of this task force that is coining this, the I-70 Strangler. Additional officers are then added to the task force. So after the fourth body, that's when everybody really ramped up and they were like, this is a real problem. And it seems isolated to gay men,
Mhm.
gay men and boys. And it seems isolated to this one strip off I-70, which must have been terrifying.
Yeah. Did they discover the bodies, like, along I-70, or there was mostly
They were off,
the
usually off
bars?
I-70.
Okay.
No, 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 they were not left. The bodies were usually not left at the bars. They were only picked up from the bars and the clubs, and then somehow they were taken to a remote location under the guise of maybe hooking up, and that's where the strangulation happened, and then the bodies are discarded on these, like, rural off streets off I-70.
Gotcha.
But it's interesting, and I would say that this is possibly a damaging time for the case because there is a consistency with these murders, right? There's a consistency that's being established between the gay men and boys, the I-70 situation, but I think this is also when the FBI gets involved. It's after the fourth murder, sometime between 81 to 83. The FBI tried to probe. I think they did a bit of a disservice because what they did was they created a profile and they split the profile into two different people, suggesting that there were maybe two separate people targeting these boys, and I think that confused, in my opinion, a lot of the investigation. One profile I think was saying that this was a man who maybe had a military background and was like in his mid to upper 40s. The other one was saying this was a guy who was probably in his 20s. But the common thread I think was that it was most likely a man who was gay himself, who had a deep sense of shame and self-hatred,
Mm.
which was giving him motive to hunt and kill these boys.
I wonder why they thought it was 2 different people.
I don't really know what that was. I mean, all I saw was the description of how they crafted the profile together, and I couldn't piece together like what informed that. But for some reason, it did diverge, and I think that that really harmed who they were looking for at this time. Because as we
Mhm.
would learn, neither of those profiles really fit Herb. I mean,
Okay.
except for the other element of him being a gay man who hates himself, which is why he's
Yeah.
killing these men.
Yeah. I was almost
But
wondering if it was, like, 2 of them were both minors, and maybe they thought, "Oh, there's one
Mhm.
guy that's going after really young guys," and but
It could
anyways,
have
I'll
been
let you
something
press
like
on.
that. No, 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 it could have been something like that, to
Yeah.
be honest, because I couldn't piece together, like, why they had split it up that way, but they did. And like I said, there was also a hesitancy, I think, with a lot of this investigation when it came to interviewing gay men as witnesses, because a lot of the gay men who maybe saw these things go down in the clubs or in the bars, they didn't wanna go on the record, and they because a lot of them weren't out.
Mm,
So if police did wanna go out and do interviews, they weren't finding many witnesses who would, you know, give a statement, and police also did not wanna do stakeouts or do any kind of, like, plant work inside the gay bars and clubs, which is exactly, like, where the field was, like, where the praying field was, where all of it was happening, so I think that also delayed things when it came to the case. But while this is happening in the '80s, year after year, there are still bodies that are accruing. I think there is another one in 1985 that is Eric Rotker, age 17, again, found strangled to death, semi nude, with a burn mark on his shoulder. And he's 85. The year after is Michael Allen Glenn, age 29, also found strangled, nearly nude, only this time he's in Ohio by 1986.
hmm.
So I think that's where the I-70 continuity came from. It was this stretch of land where we know that these are gay men getting picked up in these places. Some of them sex workers. They're strangled at a remote location, and then they are dropped off by somebody who is driving up I-70. And
Mhm.
then supposedly they drive back down to Indianapolis. It's so interesting that so much of the pickup of the men was centralized to downtown Indianapolis, and even so, police still didn't know who they were looking for.
That's so wild.
That's it's a poor investigation.
Yeah.
By '87, we had James Robbins Jr., age 21, who met a similar fate, and then I believe another in 1989. So this just kept going year after year. Herb is an active serial killer, and he's profiling very similar people, I would say, although the ages do kind of vary somewhat. I mean, there are some men that are upper 20s. We would even learn there are some men who are in their 40s, but there are very, very young men as well. So that could have played into it, but this would continue, I believe, until a change in the early 90s.
My god, we're at a full decade.
Oh, this goes beyond, to be
My
honest, because Herb, up until this point, had been connected to the I-70 Strangler killings and dumpings of the bodies, but something had changed in the late '80s in terms of the method of how he was gonna carry this out, because what happens is he acquires the Save-A-Lot thrift stores, so he gets a ton of money coming in, and he ends up getting this estate. This is the era of Fox Hollow Farm, which I think you have pictures of, correct?
Mhm. Yes.
How would you describe it just from I mean, I know I kind of grazed over it, but how would you describe how it looks visually?
It looks
Because
like
it's
a
not just a home.
no, no. I mean, this is like a big Tudor style mansion. You've got like the huge round drive up driveway. Um, I mean, it looks very I know it's like out in Indianapolis. It looks very like
Mhm.
New Englandy if I had to like guess where it was, but it's very
I'm forgetting what
it's a
the
freaking
suburb
estate.
is. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. I'm forgetting what the actual suburb was that it was in, but it is in Indianapolis, but it's kind of far out into, like, one of the other, like, private suburbs, I guess you could say, the developing suburbs of the
Yeah.
'80s.
I will
So
also say that one
yeah.
picture, sorry, where it's lit up at night, freaking spooky. It's spooky. It's a Tudor style, which I
Mhm.
think is, like, really pretty and storybooky, but can be kinda scary at night. It does look that way.
It's just so big too. I think
Yeah.
homes that are that, like, true estates like that, that are so big, they are spooky.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that there are people who, like, have to put their money somewhere, but that's such a big house.
Yeah. Oh my god.
But this all happened in, let's see, May of 1988. This is when Herb and his wife actually purchased and moved into Fox Hollow Farm, which is an 18-acre property, and it was built in 1978, so it's relatively new, and it's off 156th Street in Westfield, Indiana. That's what it
Okay.
was, Westfield. So it was at the time, his chain of thrift stores, it was kind of booming, and that's what allowed him to afford this lifestyle and everything. And soon it would become really a killing field for him because he no longer needed to kill and ditch these bodies off the side of the road off I-70. So I think this is an important era between 88 to 91 where there was a distinct difference as to how he lures these boys, what he does to them and where, and then how he gets rid of the bodies. And these are the boys that we can definitively connect to Herb. The I-70 cases, it's a little more difficult, and there are still some people who cast doubt. I do not believe that. I believe that it is all connected to Herb.
And remind me, you're saying like the Fox Hollow burying or like the body count era is like 88 and on, or like late 80s,
It's
early
interesting.
90s?
The I-70, he was still participating, I think, from the timeline that I looked at, he was still participating in some of the murders that are later connected to the I-70 strangulations and dumpings of the body off I-70s all the way through 1991.
Whoa,
However, the Fox Hollow murders and burials there, those started, I believe, in 88.
in 88.
So
Okay.
he's doing both for a period of time, for like
Oh my
4
God.
years.
Wow.
The method of the kill really ramped up in the early 90s. This is how it all changed. So Herb would pick up these men and he would bring them back from the gay bars or the clubs to the home, to the estate, usually under a phone name, not always Brian Smart, it was something else. He would introduce them, in many cases, to the autoerotic asphyxiation kink as a cover to get their guard down. So they're assuming that they're about to engage in some kind of rough play or it's a kink or this is a hookup situation they can trust until the very moment that it's too late. They black out. And he would use a variety of things to do this. He would sometimes use ropes, and he had been doing this for a long time. Even during the I-70 days, he would use towels, sometimes his own hands. And when he had Fox Hollow, he would use pool hoses from the indoor pool on the property. He would then sometimes take the bodies of the men and the boys that he had killed on this property. He would take them to the backyard of this 18-acre estate. He would burn them, and then once they were burned, he would rip apart the charred tissue and the bones to disconnect everything. And they were sometimes buried very deep into the property in the wood line. Sometimes he would just scatter the bones near the woods.
Oh my
My question
God.
through all of it was
How?
how could the wife have
Oh,
not
right.
known
Right. That's exactly what I was
anything?
thinking.
This is what I was getting at before. It is somewhat context dependent. So Herb, I think about it this way. They had met in 71, so they are decades into the marriage at this point. He requested alone time even before they had Fox Hollow. And granted, it is this massive estate. You would think you have all the space in the world to have your alone time. He would often have his wife take the kids to their lake house
Mm-mm.
and say, I need time alone in the
And I'm
house.
sure she was ready to go.
She did. I mean, it seemed like she didn't really bat an eye, to be
Yeah.
honest. She just picked
Yeah.
up the kids, and maybe it was pleasurable for her enough to get the kids out of the house and just be away from him. I'm not really
Mhm.
sure what the dynamic is because after all of this comes out, she kind of holes up in her privacy in the agony of what came out about this. But nonetheless, she would routinely go away with the kids,
Mm.
and this would leave him unattended. And he would be able to, at least a couple of times a year, have the house to himself for days, if not weeks, where he would be in there. He would go to the gay bars, go to the gay clubs in downtown, bring the boys back, kill them, strangle them, and then he starts to dismember the bodies.
God. I wonder if she ever noticed a pattern right before she was about to leave, if he would start to get really, like, gleeful or anything that he would
Oh,
start to
that's
do.
interesting. Yeah, like how, if his demeanor kind of changed or
Yeah.
something.
Mhm.
If he had any tells, it's strange because he does seem to cover very well with certain people in his life. He sort of learned that behavior from a young age. So I'm curious if this was just such a normal thing for her that she never really thought twice about it. She was like, he's just an odd man who likes his
Yeah.
solitude, or if she really was suspicious
Yeah.
that
Or
something
if the
else went
kids were just
down.
the focus.
Could have been. Well, the kids are actually part of the reason that she does become suspicious later on because
Oh.
they find something.
Oh, shoot.
This is, let's see, this is a time I think where during the era of like the kids going off to the lake house with the mom, there are times, of course, when the kids are at the home and they're playing and family life looks somewhat normal, but there are some things that happen, some things that are discovered that give her pause or perk her ears up where she's like, should I be looking closer at you? Kind of thing. Which when we hear it, like without context, we're like, oh my God, girl, like call the police kind of. It's
Yeah.
crazy, crazy how strange this man is. But there is a fateful day, of course, in 1994, after Tony had hooked up with Herb, where the whole case goes belly up. All of a sudden, everything that Herb had been concealing for all these years, dodging the questions from the wife, possible suspicion from police who are maybe looking in his direction or at least profiling similar to him, Brian Smart is going to get uncovered. But before I talk about how all of this unraveled after all these murders, how are you feeling about the transition from the method of the kill, from the I-70 Strangler days to the Fox Hollow days?
Oh my god. So, I mean, I guess the strangling with, like, the hose and the whatever, I'm sure it was like a freaking playground for him once he got to the estate. I mean, having all that space, having time, um,
Mhm.
I'm sure he took a lot of liberties that, like, we don't even know about with some of the people that he ended up killing. It just I just have such a creepy feeling from him going to kind of like a traveling serial killer to all of a sudden having like a specific home base with like tools and like
Mhm.
multiple methods that he probably like places he could hide them or take them or whatever. I mean, the story at the top about him taking him down to the indoor pool was harrowing in and of itself because I was thinking to myself, like, well, is he going to drown him? Like, there's all these
Mhm.
different methods that are now available to him. It doesn't have to be so quick. But I kind of am like, I feel like that's gonna be the reason why he gets caught is because I think he's probably gonna misstep or, you know, um,
You start
just
to
have.
get very lax. As soon as you think
Yes.
you're on, like, safe grounds, you're like, "Well,
Yeah.
this is my home. I own
Yes.
this. I control this."
Mhm.
Until people start poking holes in things that you're not hiding very well. But also, I should say, the other part of his method when he would bring these men and these boys back to Fox Hollow, yes, he would introduce the autoerotic asphyxiation kink, but he would also drug a lot of these boys because he would offer them, because it was like a bar and like a pool that he had, he would offer them a drink. There would be some kind of a drug in that that would sedate them. And if they took the drink, they would be rendered almost incapacitated. And then he has his way with them and eventually strangles them. Right. So there's no fight
Yeah.
whatsoever. Tony just happened to be a unique case because Tony already had a bad feeling, and Tony was like, "I'm good on the drink.
Mhm.
I'm good." That drink did have something in it, by the way.
Oh my god.
So he got very lucky. But in 1994, not only did Tony go to the police, but something else had happened in that home. So Herb had kids, right? 3 children, and they would often play on the property. And then Julie, the wife, there is an incident where one of her kids, the son, comes running up to her in the house holding a human skull found in the backyard.
No.
This was a skull from one of Herb's victims. So Julie is in shock. She's in disbelief. And she's like, we have to call the police because it's like there are human remains. I don't even think she's cognizant or thinking that it could be related to Herb in any way. She's just like, oh my God, there's a human body on our property. So what Herb does is he takes control and actually claims the skull and says it is his. He goes, "It's mine, but it's not really mine." He says it's an anatomy skull that belonged to his father during his years of practicing medicine, and Herb found it in a box in the garage when he was cleaning it out like weeks or months back, and he thought to bury it in the backyard.
Because that makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, to Julie, it certainly did. I mean, think
Well,
about it
Julie,
because
I have questions about.
well, a lot of people have questions about
I've
Julie
got
and what she did
questions.
or did not see. Was she, like, living in, like, ignorance
La
is
La Land.
bliss? Like, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna look the other way forever and just keep a comfortable life kind of vibe? But the story that he fed her, and he's not a bad liar by any means, he's very used to this. He did say, "It belonged to my father. My father used to practice medicine. It's an anatomy skull. It's a part of, like, a full, like, anatomy skeleton for teaching purposes. It's in an old box in the garage after dad died. So I just thought I should bury it because it's a human skull." And then the kid found it. So that was the story that he led with, which felt like a decently believable story for her, but she still had her suspicions. She was like, there seems to be something that's going on here. And
Mhm.
it's like right under my nose. What cracked it all was that Tony had already told police about his experience, but he didn't have a name. He had no name for the cops. Tony later found and followed Herb. This is what broke all of it.
Oh my god.
So here's how this went down because you need to strap in because after what 15 years of an investigation that police can't crack, Tony, one of the victims of the investigation, is able to nab the guy in less than a year. It's like
He's like, "I got this."
literally. I mean, what happened was Tony went to the police. He told the story, and the police were like, "Well, if you don't have a name, we can't really do much, and you're giving us like a phone name, or at least you think it was an alias, this Brian Smart character. So Tony remembered where he got picked up. Tony continues to patron those gay bars and those gay clubs, ends up spotting in 1995 Brian from a distance. What Tony did was he followed Brian's car and wrote down the plate number after leaving the gay bar.
Wow.
Went back to police, turned in the plate number. That plate number immediately turned up a suspect they don't think they were anticipating, Herb Baumeister. Not who they thought they should have been aiming for. This is a family man who has a beautiful home in the community, a wife, 3 children, owns a chain. That is not who they thought would be targeting gay men. But nonetheless, they do come knocking at that estate and they want to take a look around. Initially, Herb and Julie immediately deny the officers and like, what are you talking about? But this prompts something in Julie because all the pieces are coming together all of a sudden. The secrecy, the days and the weeks of needing the alone time at the estate, the lack of intimacy over the last 25 years, the human skull found on the property. Julie has her suspicions to the point that not only does she file for divorce immediately, she contacts the police and she gives them consent as the other homeowner to come and search the home, all 18 acres of Fox Hollow on June of 1996. When a subsequent search would take place of the grounds, they would immediately uncover the hidden remains from what I read were 11 or 12 different bodies on the property. They're not entirely sure, and I believe 8 of those potential 12 have been identified and connected to missing men. There were thousands of different human bone fragments and various remains that were found on the property at the hands of Herb, and the whole story implodes on itself. Every single dot gets connected in that instant where all of the investigators who were on the original task force for the I-70 Strangler, they now realize the profile they were looking for is this guy.
Oh my God.
They just never thought it could be him because while they're searching through all of this, they're like, this is the guy with the family portrait over the mantle type.
Yeah.
Like he's the smile on his face type guy. It is unclear to me how soon after all of this happened that Herb like caught wind and then took action, but he fled. He immediately left Indianapolis and he actually drove up to Canada. I think he was in Pinery Provincial Park near Grand Bend, and he was staying in a motel. Drove up there. Nobody knew where he was, but he knew an arrest was looming.
Oh my God.
While he was there, what we know happened was that Herb drafted a 3-page note, and then he took his life on the 3rd of July, 1996, with a gunshot wound to the head. This, of course, did not stop the investigation, and in fact, it gave immense credibility to the suspicion at the time that Herb was responsible for all of it. But what's interesting is that the investigators, once they retrieved that 3-page note, it did not really list any confession to any of this. He actually kind of disguised his suicide by saying that it was because of Julie, it was because of family problems, there were looming financial troubles. That was the reason he took his life. Nothing to do with all of the bodies that were found on his property. But note or not, the police continued to press into this investigation, where it would ultimately be determined, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Herb was their culprit. He was the I-70 Strangler, now identified and now dead. This was done through a combination of tangible evidence that I'd read about, the human remains that were found on the property, as well as many, many witness statements and testimonies that came forward from survivors who saw and encountered Herb over the years between 1980 all the way up through his death in 96. And of course, the very obvious and suspicion around him taking his life as soon as all of this came to the surface. In the aftermath of this horrific story, Julie had been cleared, that she still claims to this day she didn't know anything about any of it. She was mortified from all of it. It was horrifying, and it appears both her and the children left Fox Hollow. She sold the property and kind of went into a state of hiding. They have remained very private, as far as I can tell, and have not spoken on this story, on Herb, since the 90s.
Wow.
But the answers that all of this provided to the families of the men and the boys who were victims of Herb's crimes were kind of invaluable. I mean, for so long, there were men that had gone missing that had never been found. There were men that were found dead in these horrible ways that their families had always wondered about. And not to say that this had given them justice, but it certainly gave them a sense of closure. The real thorn of all of it outside of Herb, I think, is the police work on it and how long this was allowed to go on until there was really one brave person who not only came forward with his story, Tony, but Tony also cracked
Had to
it.
do the damn job.
That's the thing. I'm like, Tony followed the guy and got the license plate and
Yeah.
got the police a name, which could have been done if there had been maybe stakeout work, I would say, done at any of the clubs, because Herb really never deviated from Indianapolis. This was
Yeah.
all going down in gay clubs and gay bars in Indianapolis, which is the craziest thing.
I was literally thinking about that. I was like, well, clearly Herb didn't feel the pressure at all. If he kept going back to the same areas and bars over and over again, he clearly, because I'm sure as a serial killer, he must have been very observant, looking around, thinking, okay, at this point, somebody's got to be on my trail,
Mhm.
and nobody was there. And so he must have. I mean, honestly, that it kind of helps explain why he just fled as fast as he did, because I feel
Mhm.
like he almost felt like, I mean, obviously he was at the end of whatever this was gonna be, but, like, I
Mhm.
had a good run is almost how it, like, he feels no remorse clearly by that, like, the note that he left. He's just talking about his wife and kids and
Which I think
not.
was maybe I'm curious about that note actually. Why do you think he wrote that note and didn't own up to any of it? Was it because even in death, the shame of admitting not only from the murders of, that he had committed, but the shame of admitting that he had been sleeping with men was just too much even in death
Yeah,
to write about? You
probably.
would think at the end of your rope or your life in that way, if you're no matter what you've done that's so horrible, that you would have some ownership over it?
Yeah, I would think so. But, yeah, I guess it didn't seem to care much about. Because I would think, if that's part of it, I would think that if he really actually loved his wife and kids, like, at some level, even if it's platonic, that would feel like, I'm just trying to put myself in his shoes, a good thing if I'm gonna take my own life to, like, have kind of shared, like, left behind so that they have some sort of, I guess, closure as to why I felt so much
Mhm.
shame and I was away all the time and whatever, but that element feels so weird, but it the fact that he doesn't acknowledge it and then just says something to the wife and the kids that feels kind of flippant, it just kind of proves to me that he cared so much more about the murdering and the having that side of his life than he ever did about the actual family life.
Mhm.
It was all
I
just kind of a it was just kinda helping him keep up the ruse to do what he's always wanted to do.
Right. It's like not even just that the wife was a beard, the whole life was a beard.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it makes complete sense. I wondered if that was it as well, but I also wondered if maybe in some twisted part of his mind, he thought that this was his uh last ditch effort of protecting his family by not
Mm,
admitting to it, where he was like, yes, you could own up and be culpable for all of it and own it and give closure to everybody, even your own family. Or is it something in his mind where he's like, this is the last thing I can do to protect them
mhm.
by concealing, even in death, admission to the darkest secrets of my life, which is that I've been luring, sleeping with, and murdering these men and boys since 1980.
It's so crazy just thinking about the night that Tony got taken. Because that house would be something else to see, like, and you'd have so many things to pull on to describe back to police, but I guess it was all just, like, in the dark. He purposely took him on, like, windy roads and everything, but I was
Mhm.
like, "God, if only Tony and, like, one other person had made it out of there." Because 'cause I'm sure back at the bars, you'd be like, once Herb came back in, like, weeks later, you'd be like, "Oh my god, that's that guy that had that, like, crazy big house that, like, he's super,
Mhm.
super rich." Like, you know how people kinda, like, gossip when you see certain regulars come in, like, so he's very, I would say, I don't even wanna say the word lucky, but, like, very lucky that Tony was really the only one that got away that couldn't describe his very lavish life.
Well, what's interesting is that Tony there were other men that got away, to be honest. There were other men, from what I read, that were invited to the home,
Hmm.
and it was a similar situation to Tony. I think the illusion of this case is that it presents as if Herb was doing this back to back to back. He was in a sense, but there are years
Yeah,
between
that's
each of
right,
these
that's right.
kills.
Yeah.
That's the craziest thing is that, like, in my mind when I'm hearing it, I'm like, yeah, how could people not have recognized, like, a week later, oh my god, that's the same guy with the big house? but it was like 1982, there's a murder, then 83, then 84.
Mhm.
He takes a big chunk of time between them. From what we know, these are only the cases, only the victims and the bodies that we know of. There
Yeah.
are investigators believe there are many more than 25.
Ugh. Do you know how many bodies were found at the house? Was it like
I had read 2 different reports. One said 12, the other said 11, but from what I read, if it was 12 or 11, 8 of the 11 or 12 were identified.
oh my
There
god.
were other bodies, a lot of them were parts of bodies, just fragments of bones that they've still never linked to anybody or a missing person report.
That is so devastating. Oh my god.
But that really is where the case stands because Herb did die in 1996. He took his own life. Fox Hollow was sold. And what's interesting, and I wasn't going to go too deep into this, but the people who did acquire Fox Hollow, and I believe it's had some turnover over the years, but a number of people who have lived there have said that there are very strange experiences they have in that house to this
Mm.
day. Lots of sightings of young men out in the yard
Oh my
across
god.
the property, like very strange experiences of hearing whispers of the names of the men. Like it's very much in like the paranormal camp, but I didn't want to go too deep into that. I just kind of
Yeah.
wanted to do a little bit of digging and figure out what happened to Fox Hollow, like what is it now? But there's no further information on Julie, on the kids. I didn't even find their names. And I didn't include all of the pictures of the different victims of the men. There are numerous, and there are numerous pictures that are connected to them. But because some of them are still unknown, I felt that it was better to include all or none in
Yeah.
this instance instead of sort of cherry picking. But that is the complete story from what I know and from what I researched in relation to the I-70 Strangler and Herb.
Oh my god. I was wondering this whole time. I'm like, "Oh my god, when did Jeffrey Dahmer happen?" I wonder if these overlapped at all. They must have.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would think with an Indianapolis and Milwaukee being so close to each other that they would be like, this is just I almost wondered if it was like a copycat situation at some level, but um,
It's interesting. I mean, because Dahmer wasn't figured out until late 80s or early 90s, I guess. So
mhm,
I don't think they knew of each other, of course, at this
yeah,
time, but it's so interesting, like how much of it parallels one another. These two things happening almost at the same time
mhm,
in a similar fashion. Dahmer is much more gruesome for obvious reasons, but nonetheless, this is still gay men targeting gay men.
yeah. And it makes me wonder at that time how many more of these cases were happening that were it was
That we
not
still
even
don't know
gay men
about to
targeting
this
gay men,
day.
but gay men being targeted. And then, yeah, and still going on to this day. I think at that time period, it was like just, I'm sure with, like the AIDS crisis and county police already having a feeling about going after these types of
Mhm.
cases. I'm sure it was a very, it kind of just breaks my heart to think about like frickin' Tony having to be the one to save the day. Cause it's like, it
Yeah.
made
I
me
did
actually
write that in my notes. I was like, "Keep calm. Don't let your blood pressure get out of control." 'Cause that really
me
the
over
part of
here.
yeah, that really was, like, the part of the story where I was like, I can believe, but, like,
Yeah.
it's unfathomable to me that there was a task force of more than 10 people and the FBI between 81 to 83 who still couldn't figure this out, and it took Tony less than a year.
Yeah. My God. It made me think about one of the creepers, I feel like during one of our Q&As asks something like there was something I like, do police ever recognize like how sometimes our comments or like certain victims putting pressure on things like helps to, really boost the case, like do or help find a solve? Do people talk about that? Like, have you guys seen that? And I had to be really honest and be like, honestly, probably not as much as you think, as sad as that is to say. Like I would be shocked to hear if I'm forgetting the county name, but if Hawthorne County
Oh, where the bodies were
or where
dumped?
Tony kind of made the yeah,
Oh,
wherever the
There's Hamilton, I think
Hamilton.
Hancock are the 2.
Okay. But like if I were Hancock County Police, I would be giving Tony a freaking like Medal of Honor. Like that's but I don't feel like people
They
get
will never admit
recognized
to
because
it.
there's pride involved.
Of course, well,
Anyways.
yeah, of course, because it's an admission of, like, not even just dropping the ball, but, like, honestly, poor police work in a lot
Yeah.
of this case,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because a lot of this, I think, could have been because it was so centralized to one place, as we keep, like, repeating, and I have to, like, hit that over the head with the hammer. But because it was so centralized to just gay bars and clubs out of Indianapolis, it should be a no-brainer that, of course, like, a stakeout would probably have given you some answers much earlier, at least, like, a decade before, like, all of this blew up.
Yeah, or at least put a stop to it or scare the guy, spook him enough that, you know, people's lives probably would have been saved had they done that. Even just
Yeah.
a stakeout here and there.
Well, that's the other thing too is, like, that's why I was kinda saying that I think the FBI work on this kind of hurt the case because they had given those 2 separate profiles, so at a certain point, I'm not even sure the task force knew who they were looking for or if it was multiple people, so yes, we could trace it back to the gay clubs and the gay bars of, like, yes, you should stake out those, but at a certain point, they definitely thought they were looking for 2 different individuals with
Mhm.
wildly different backgrounds,
Mm.
and that's part of the problem, so if you're gonna get in FBI, make sure that you know what you're doing. That's all
Yeah.
I'll say.
What did I hear somebody say recently? They were talking about the FBI, but they said the female Bureau of Investigation, like going after like like figuring out if your guy's like cheating on you or something. And
Where
she was
did
like,
you
so I
hear that?
contacted the FBI. I heard it on a podcast. I'm trying to remember. She was like, so I contacted the FBI, the female
Mm,
Bureau of Investigation,
of course,
to
absolutely.
get some answers. But
Well,
yeah,
they will get the job done. That's not the FBI I'm talking about.
that's right.
The
Oh
Female
my
Bureau
God.
of
Yeah.
Investigation, they have a 100% success rate.
They do. They do. They absolutely do. And it's a turnaround time of 24 to 48 hours.
Was gonna say less,
Less.
12. But that is everything that I have got for you on this case. So thank you
Ah,
for the first case back after a
yes.
long hiatus. That was a bit of a different one, I guess, for Creep Time because that is kind of a proper true crime case, and it was so expansive that that was hard to bake into one singular episode. But I feel good about sharing a story like that that I think not a lot of people know, especially in comparison to Dahmer.
Yeah, that was super interesting. I'm very curious if they've ever done like a TV series on that or something
Well,
because
that's what I was
it's
gonna say. There's a Hulu doc.
Oh,
So
is there?
yeah, I found this out after I had already picked the case and started the research that not only did somebody recommend it on Reddit, but I think a Hulu documentary just came out about it, which I have not watched, I'll say, but like, so take it with a grain of salt
Yeah.
because we've all seen how like docs can come out and they could be swayed one way or the other, as we've
Yes,
seen with John
yes.
Benet Ramsey as of late.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, there is a Hulu doc on
Oh
this.
my God, I'll have to watch it. Do you know what it's called?
It might just be called the I-70 Strangler or something
Okay.
similar to that.
Okay. It's called
But
Striking Milk.
striking milk, baby.
Striking Milk, baby. I have not forgotten about that.
What was it? Striking underscore milk 2813, I think is what it was, the username.
That's incredible. Y'all keep these coming.
I plan to strike milk in the year
Striking
in the year
Milk.
2813.
This was a milk mine.
A milk mine baby. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in and thank you for listening to another episode of Creep Time. Very much appreciate being back on. I was excited
Yes,
to jump into a new case with you,
I
but
know.
until next time, baby, we are going to have to say goodbye.
And good luck, y'all.
Goodbye, you guys. We'll catch you on Creep Time After Dark right after this show.
Yes, bye, creepers.